What is everybody? Welcome back to the FTN NBA live stream. This is my first playoff live stream, so welcome to the playoffs. If you guys haven't been tuned into any of the shows previous, I'm sure you have been. But yeah, it's been a couple of really good days so far for playoffs in terms of some good games, some bad games, but some good DFS and betting stuff. So that's been fun. Adam, how's your playoffs been in the NBA so far, and how are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, it'll go a lot better if Cleveland wins tonight. But yeah, I mean, this slate just, two-game slates can, especially in a play-in situation where everybody's playing minutes, can be, not as hectic, but it got a little crazy today with the Paul George news. But I think the better question is, how are you doing? Basketball, baseball, like baseball. Yet the other thing is you forget it at the time, but it's like yeah, you could. It's like, oh, basketball. You can, stuff happens, but you have till 7 or 7:30. But baseball, there's day slates. So, I think the better question is, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. A little hectic right now, but MLB is always kind of hectic early on in the year because they have so many day games. Like as the year goes on, they'll kind of normalize the schedule and get everybody playing at the night games. But yeah, right now, man, especially the first week, there was like 3, 4 slates a day, so it was kind of crazy. But all good things, all good things. But yeah, let's talk some hoops though. We have, like you mentioned, 2 games here, and when I was doing minutes, like I actually think it's kind of cool because when I'm doing minutes, I tend to think that I like to put a lot of time and effort into it. But when there's like 10, 11 games, it's just not possible. You have to like efficiently like allocate your time, right? When there's a 2 game slate, you can really, dive pretty deep into some of these rotations and stuff. And obviously you mentioned in the playoffs, you probably expect not a ton of like interesting like quirks about a rotation, but you have a couple here in terms of Jared Allen returning and Paul George being out. So that's 2 key spots there, in my opinion, and we'll talk about some others. But there's some very clear spots where I was looking at the minutes and I was like, okay, this is either going to you know go really poorly for a guy or it could be really good. And then there's obviously a couple of guys that you just feel pretty confident are going to play like 40 minutes because it's the playoffs, and especially in these games where it's win or go home as they are the play-ins. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the the last slate I was on the stream with Zach, it was Tuesday, and it was the two games. Like if you lost, like those teams that lost are playing today, so it wasn't exactly like you have to win this game or you're
Yeah.
doomed. So a lot of questions were like, if the games get out of hand, like will the coaches, like for instance, I think question about Cleveland, like if Cleveland were to have been getting destroyed by Brooklyn, even though it's still like the playoff scenario, would Cleveland just kind of cut their losses and rest Garland for today's game? Of course, that game didn't really blow out, but yeah, now I mean it's even easier to project minutes because this is the final game of the season, perhaps for both for two of these teams tonight. So and yeah, minutes, especially, and it's even we'll talk about it, but it's even more interesting when you look at the team that's with Paul George. Like it's a Clippers team that we've seen in the playoffs the last couple of years change their rotation up entirely on a game by game basis in a series because they've been going small a lot. But now it's like maybe things change because you don't have Paul George, you obviously don't have Kawhi Leonard. So I think that entire game is obviously more interesting now. But overall, the playoffs, yeah, I mean, there's not many times in the regular season you're projecting players for 40 minutes as potential floor, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. Like you looked at a couple of the Clippers guys, they played big minutes, and obviously now with this being do or die game, I would probably expect a similar scenario for someone like Reggie Jackson. But let's talk about this first game here, the Eastern Conference game, Atlanta and Cleveland, your Cleveland Cavaliers. And I was looking at their rotation in the first game, and obviously you're going to see a lot of changing things with this game with Jared Allen returning, but it's kind of strange because they have so many guys who can move up and down in terms of the actual position that they're playing. Like they play Laurie Markkinen at 3 at times, but then they have no problem giving him some time at the 5. Same with Jetty Osman, who played 21 minutes last game. Okoro only played like 13 or 14 minutes last game, but they don't mind moving him up and down a little bit as well. So Cleveland, I think, is a pretty unique scenario, and obviously with Allen returning, the big question is going to be how much does he play? I wouldn't have any concern. I know it's a finger injury, and it sounds to me like he's returning early because it's a winner go home type game, which makes sense. But the phrasing that scares me is he's going to give it a go. I hate hearing that. I don't
Yeah.
like it at all. So that's the one thing that's scaring me off of it. If and I'm not saying he's not going to play any minutes, but if it was a scenario where I wasn't concerned at all about the minutes, I'm probably putting Jared Allen in there for 32 to 35 minutes. Instead, I have him at 28 or 29, I believe. So what are your thoughts on Allen? Do you think he's going to be able to play fully? Obviously, I think we can kind of both agree that he's going to try his best to play as many minutes as possible. But also, if if it's not going well or if it is bothering him, it's not like they don't have guys to play there.
Right.
They have Markkanen, Love, and Mobley. So what are your thoughts on Jared Allen returning and the rest of this Cleveland team?
Yeah, so he definitely is returning early. There's no doubt about it. He said that like he's still in a decent amount of pain. So it's going to come down to pain tolerance, which it's a lot easier to kind of say a player is going to be limited if they're coming off a foot injury, an ankle injury, what have you. But with this injury, it's tough because like if it like especially with him because a huge part of his game, setting screens, rolling, catching lobs, defending, blocking shots. So like it could easily just one lob from Garland or one defensive contest, and all of a sudden he could kind of aggravate it, and it could hurt even more.
Yep.
So I know what did you have him projected for, like 32, or you originally would have had him for 32, but you're at 28 now.
Yeah, 28 or 29. Yeah, I think 29.
Yeah, and like again, like you mentioned, like Laurie can play the 5, K Love can play the 5, Mobley obviously can play the 5. I think I think it comes down to literally, and we can't project it obviously, but pain tolerance is what it's going to. If he's fine, if it's not bothering him, I don't see situations where he's off the floor a ton. He's been the second best player in this team all year long. Having said that, though, it really does impact the rest of the rotation because Kevin Love, they can't have him play the 3, but then like Mobley, you project for 36, 37 minutes at the 4. So if Jared Allen's playing a ton of 30 minutes at the 5, that hurts Kevin Love's overall minutes. But at the same time, like this is a team I talked about in Discord. They have no playoff experience outside of Kevin Love, outside of Karis LeVert and Jared Allen. And LeVert and Jared Allen have played like 10 playoff games or something like that. So like Kevin Love needs to be on the floor. It's just hard to find a path to play him there, especially with Rondo getting back in the rotation last game. I was talking about that with Zach. Like, I didn't expect Rondo to play that much next to Garland at all last game. He was the only guard that came off the bench for this team, and he took minutes away from Okoro. So if that happens again, at the same time, you want Okoro on the floor to potentially guard to guard Trey Young. It's kind of messy with Cleveland's rotation right now. Garland's playing 40 minutes. I think we can agree on that, unless the game gets out of hand. And Mobley's playing probably 36 to 38. Everything else is kind of up in the air.
Yeah, I also think that you can count on a big workload there for LeVert as well.
Yeah, LeVert too.
I believe 40 minutes is where he was at last game. So I'm assuming a similar type scenario. I put him at 39 just to be a little bit safe because, again, like you mentioned, Okoro didn't play really at all. He played 13 minutes, I think it was, or 14. Let me double check.
Rondo was the clear impact. Like that's like Okoro came out, Rondo came in, and I did not expect them to play Rondo and Garland together all that much. But
Rondo close, which I think is even more
right. And I guess I probably should have led with that. When I mentioned playoff experience, Rondo was obviously the player I didn't mention because I was making the point. But yeah, Rondo obviously has the playoff experience on this team, which probably has a lot to do with why he was on the floor. But I do think they want Okoro on Trey Young, but like it's not like Rondo, he's not a defensive player he used to be, but like, playoff Rondo, like it's a thing. Like I think he's going to be on the floor 20 minutes. And on this slate, what is he, 3,400? Like that's when sharing the floor with Garland, his usage rate and stuff, but he still has like a 17 or 19% assist rate and 0.9 fantasy points per minute. So he's not like, just because he's not handling the ball as much, he's still viable in fantasy when he's on the floor with Garland.
Yeah, plus he can kind of, pick up other, ancillary stats as well, especially on FanDuel where, you can pick up a few steals here and there. My thing is like, I think if he's going to be popular, I don't think he will be popular, but I do think that that's pretty volatile in terms of the minutes. Same goes for even Kevin Love at this aspect. Same for Okoro. Like I think those three guys, like Markkanen, I wouldn't say he's volatile with his minutes because I think he's probably going to play like 28 minutes regardless. But I do think that he could be in a spot where he plays more which I think is very interesting, especially if he's going to, not be super popular, and the price isn't bad on him either, under 6K. I think Markkinen is super sneaky in this spot. You have Garland, Mobley, and Levert. They'll all be pretty popular, all fine plays, all going to play 40 minutes, or Mobley probably just under 40 minutes, but I think Garland and Levert will be right around 40. But like that's not a unique thing either on this slate, that 40-minute mark. I think I have like five or six guys actually projected for 40 minutes, but very good plays in their own right. But I think Markkinen is kind of the guy that I think might be a little bit overlooked. Like he'll be more popular than Love, Okoro, and those guys. But do you have any appeal to Markkinen as well? And then also, are you going to be playing Jared Allen, or are you just kind of waiting and seeing?
Yeah, we don't have their starting five yet, right?
Right.
Okay, so like they could go different ways. Like they could Discord we were talking earlier. Like maybe they go Rondo at the two, right, and start Rondo, and then they go Okoro at the three, Levert. Like they could do different things. I think they probably just stick with what they. I would guess their starting five is probably Garland, Levert, Markkinen, Mobley, Allen. But yeah, like on this slate, Allen, I think Allen can still be fine. It's just I feel better about Mobley's minutes, and he's underpriced at 6,800. So like if I'm choosing between the front court, I'd prefer Mobley. And while it's a lot more volatile now, I mean Kevin Love, we know we've said this all season. If he can play 25 to 28 minutes, let alone even having to play 30 plus, under 6K, I mean, he's been so efficient that he can still be perfectly fine at under 6K playing 25 minutes. But kind of just ranking the Cavs plays for me, it'd probably go Garland, Mobley, Rondo, and then it's close between Allen and Levert. It's very tough to project this team all of a sudden now, though, because like you mentioned,
Yeah.
Markkinen plays 3 and 4 and can play 5 if they need him to. Kevin Love can play 4 and 5. Plus, we don't even know if Allen will be limited. I mean, Allen isn't officially in yet, is he? Like I saw he's expected to play, but he's not officially in. I'm assuming he plays, but it's I really want to see a starting five and if they mix it up at all.
The big interesting thing for me that I think could shake some things up is if Allen isn't starting, which I think is not like impossible. I don't know if it's super likely. I think if
Well,
like
especially with the Hawks not having Collins and Capella, they only have Capella, so like I think that makes it a little bit likelier. I'd still be kind of surprised if he didn't start, but I wouldn't put it completely out of the question.
Yeah, I would still be surprised too, but I don't think it would be like the most surprising thing that could happen on the slate. Like I think Rondo starting would be pretty surprising. Um, but if Rondo starts, that probably tells me that what they did last game wasn't intentional, and they kind of just went with the flow of things, and then they realized that that's what they want to do now. Because I think that, which obviously we'll never know, like we're never gonna get that answer. Like, did they mean to start Okoro only play him 13 minutes and play Rondo 26 minutes and let him close? Like, I don't think we'll ever have a definitive answer to that. But I think if we knew that, that would be answering a lot of questions, right? Because then we would feel a lot better about Rondo's minutes this game, and a lot better about just projecting the team's minutes in general. Because me personally, I'm not putting Rondo back at 26 minutes. That's not something I'm doing. I just don't think I don't think that's like a regular thing that he's going to continue to do. But Okoro playing 13 minutes, I also don't think is going to continue to happen, especially if he's starting. But again, if the starting lineup is different, a lot of that changes there. So make sure you're following that starting lineup, and that could kind of give us some hints there. But I think if Allen is truly going to be limited, like they just know that he's never going to be able to play, 30 minutes. They say, okay, let's just bring him off the bench when it feels right. And I think I don't think that would be the most surprising thing from this team as a starting lineup. So I think that would be the big game changer. And obviously that would help Kevin Love a ton.
Yeah, and we kind of you assume like we usually start with Garland from this team, but like I think we can both agree 8,500 on DraftKings just makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just he's going to play 40 minutes. He's going to take 20 shots. To end the season, the final 15 games, only Jokic and Kyrie Irving average more touches per game. He's been fantastic. Trey Young's defense is not good. Just, yeah, that's where you're starting with Cleveland. But, I mean, the Atlanta side's interesting, too, because we have no John Collins. We still have Bogdanovich game time decision. I expect he probably plays, but that could open up more minutes from, some of those wings. What are we looking at from Atlanta outside of the obvious with Trey Young, who, similar to Garland, probably has a higher ceiling, but is, as safe as it gets.
Yeah. So Trey Young, initially I plugged him in at 40 minutes, but then I was looking at his rotation last game, and if he would have finished out the game, he would have been at like 38, and obviously that game blew out. So I put him at like 39 minutes, which is like, I mean, basically the same thing as 40, right? Like it's not going to be the end all be all between someone who's playing 40 and someone who's playing 39, but that was just a note on his minutes. But in terms of the things that could potentially shake up here, I don't know if it's a whole lot. Like I think that you're going to see pretty consistent minutes from all the guys that we saw play, the majority of the minutes throughout the first 3.5 quarters. The one thing I think is pretty interesting is we saw Clint Capella play 30 minutes and then get yanked out with like 5 minutes left in the game. So I don't think he plays 35 minutes, but I wouldn't be that surprised if he did in this game, let alone, or especially in this game, let alone any playoff game, because you look across the floor and you have Mobley, probably just some Jared Allen, maybe even a ton of Jared Allen, Lauri Markkanen, and Kevin Love. So, I mean, obviously foul trouble is always a thing, but based on the way the rotation was going last game, if they just let him close the game, like let's say it was a 1-point game, I doubt they're taking Clint Capella off, who had 15 points and 7 boards, with 5 minutes left in the game. With that being said, he would have played 35 minutes. So if that's in the realm of possibility, we know that Clint Capella is a great permanent guy who's been struggling to get minutes this year. And someone asked me about Lamella Ball's projection last in this game, and the big thing was Lamella Ball is a guy who's just never been getting consistent minutes. And last game I had him at like 38 projected minutes, so his projection was way higher. That's the same deal with Clint Capella here, and we'll talk about Jonas Valanciunas later. Those kinds of guys who get in these playoff atmospheres, who are able to take advantage of getting mega minutes because their teams want and need to win these games. So Capella, I think, is super interesting. And again, he's a center, so I don't know if he'll be overly popular either. And I think he's a very good play.
Yeah, I like Capella. I was kind of wondering before kind of looking at some numbers if like Jarrett Allen playing would lead to maybe more Capella Okongwu lineups if we saw a lot of Allen and Mobley, but they've only played Capella and Okongwu have only played together for like 4 minutes all year. So I don't think that's something they're going to do with their season on the line. Plus we have the Clippers news, so I don't even think you have to go there. But Capella, yeah, I mean, I don't worry about foul trouble with him. He's played this team 4 times this year. He's only averaged like 2.5 personal fouls per game. And it's not like they just feed Jarrett Allen and Mobley in the post and they just kind of, play bully ball. It's mostly off, lobs and pick and roll and stuff. So I think Capella is really strong. Yes, having Jarrett Allen back helps the defense, but this defense had been taking a step back before Jarrett Allen got hurt. So it's not like a matchup to run to, but it's not something that Capella can't thrive in, especially if he's playing more minutes, which is what we've seen, especially without John Collins. The rebounding rate's up. They pretty much run the pick and roll with Capella and Trey Young only. So I like Capella quite a bit. I'd prefer him over Jarrett Allen probably.
Yeah, I would too. On FanDuel though, Jared Allen is 6,100, so a little bit more appealing over there. But where Allen is more expensive, the only reason you're ever even considering Allen over Capella is because of ownership. It's just that there's just no way that you can really make the case for Allen over Capella unless you think that he's going to for sure play 32 minutes, which I don't think anyone can really say is for sure, right? So that being the case, I think that Capella is the much safer play. But Allen, if you do think he's going to play 30 plus minutes, is the contrarian play. But if you're building a cash lineup or something, I definitely think it's Capella, who's $300 cheaper. But let's talk these wings now. Bogdanovich, Gallinari, Herter, and Hunter. A lot of these guys turned in some pretty good performances last game. Obviously, Herter had like 13 points and 5 rebounds and I think 4 or 5 assists as well. Hunter, he scored I think 19 points early on, and I think he finished with 22 or 23. And then Gallinari had 18 points as well. So all these guys played pretty well and played pretty solid minutes. And again, if you're looking at kind of what their minutes would have looked like if the game closed or if they were able to close the game, they're all around 32 or 33 minutes, with Hunter being like 34. So what are your thoughts on these wings here?
Yeah, I think they're all fine. Hunter, Gallinari, and Herter. The problem is like where do they rank on some of the Clippers wings now, right? Like kind of priced right around Batum, priced around Terence Mann, Marcus Morris. So I that's kind of the decision you have to make. If Bogdanovich for whatever reason gets ruled out, I think they're even stronger plays. But like I would probably rank them Herter, Gallinari, Hunter, Bogdanovich, just based off price. Like I think Bogdanovich has the highest ceiling because he actually handles the ball a lot more and can score like 25 real points. But I think the minutes are a little bit safer with the other three. But again, it really depends on how you feel about them compared to some of the Clippers we'll talk about.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to talk about it, but like from doing the minutes, I think that these guys are way safer in terms of minutes. Like there's a few other guys that you can kind of discuss on the Clippers. Like
Right.
for the Hawks team, like all these guys are playing 30 minutes minimum. And I think if things went wrong, I think they would all get 30 minutes unless someone got into mega foul trouble or something. But and I think 32 might even be that realm for these guys. When we talk about some of these Clippers, it gets pretty confusing in terms of looking to predict them. And I still think that despite that, the Clippers guys might have more ownership. So I think these Hawks guys are super not only interesting, but important for this slate. Like I have DeAndre Hunter for sub 20% on DraftKings. Like his minutes are locked in. Like I don't think that they're going anywhere. So that could be a spot to take advantage of not only him, but all these Hawks wings, just because they're going to have ownership because again it's a 2-game slate. Pretty much everyone's going to have some ownership unless they're a bad play. And I guess at the end we'll talk about guys who maybe aren't bad plays who are getting like no ownership. One of them, I think, if you're talking sub 20%, DeAndre Hunter. So he's
Yeah, I
another
like
guy that I
Hunter.
do like quite a bit here. But anything else on the Hawks side that you want to mention? We didn't really touch on Trey Young a whole lot. Like it's pretty much the same song and dance for Trey Young. First of all, this guy loves the playoffs, in my opinion, from what we saw last year.
Sure.
But just in general, like he's the top projected player on the slate for me by like 5-6 points. So if I was spending up, he's going to be the first guy that I click. But again, you do run into the situation where there's 3 or 4 guys who aren't that far behind him from like 8 to 9K. So it comes down to managing how many and who of them you want to get in your lineups. But Trey Young is my top projected spend up, but Darius Garland right behind him has better point per dollar score. So all depends on how you want to manage that.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. Like it'd be a little different, I think, if Paul George were playing, where
Right.
you have another spend up option, but like you can easily just play like Garland, Trey Young, and then still go to like Reggie Jackson or someone who we'll talk about in the next game.
Yep. All right. Well, let's talk this next game real quick because I think that there's a couple of really interesting things. And Phil Connor's toaster, whose name always makes me laugh, just brought up. So where's the real edge on the slate? And I think that this game is. I mentioned it when I was talking about the Hawks wings. Like some of these Clippers wings, they're getting up there in terms of ownership. Like you have Norm Powell, who's coming in at 60% projected ownership for me right now. Marcus Morris, 46%. Terence Mann's fairly low at 18%. But then you have Batum at 31%. So let's talk these Clippers guys. Now, Paul George is out. That's one thing. But Luke Kennard was also out last game. He's going to be back for this game. So that's a whole nother thing to take into account here in terms of who's going to get minutes and who's going to get what minutes. So just to reiterate right now, and I will say out of all the teams, the Clippers are by far the team I'm least confident in terms of minutes. And that is why I think that the ownership is a little bit strange here. But Reggie Jackson, lock him in for 40 minutes, in my opinion.
He's the
I
only
don't
one you can.
Right, exactly. So 40 minutes, I think that's a pretty safe projection. I guess maybe if you put him at 38, whatever. But he played 41 and a half last game. So he's going to play a ton of minutes. You have Zubac, who played 31 last game. I put him at 29 and a half just because I can never count on his minutes. Like I don't know if the playoffs are going to make them want to play him like 32, 33 minutes. I get that Joe Val's on the other side of things, but we've seen, especially at the end of the regular season, we saw plenty of times where Zubac was going against a big center and Hartenstein got run. So now 29 minutes, 29 and a half isn't a projection on what I think is going to happen. I think that's the median. So Zubac may be a guy who gets more minutes than I have him projected for, but also maybe a guy that gets less. And I think that if the scale tilted one way or the other, it would tilt more towards less. Like I could see him getting like 23 minutes. He's never going to play like 38 minutes, right?
Hmm.
So he's 45% projected ownership. That's a big number. Norm Powell, he is the biggest question mark in terms of minutes, in my opinion. If I had no concerns with him, I think he'd play 40 minutes alongside Reggie Jackson, since no Paul George there. But with the minutes looking like how he played, what was it, 26 last game? Let me go back here. I believe it was 26. Let me confirm. Yeah, 26. So basically 27. And he did close the game, but they obviously didn't start him, which again could change here. But I don't know if it's going to change because, again, there was no Kennard. Kennard could just start here and fill in that slot. If Powell starts, I probably feel more comfortable with his minutes. But if they're going to be afraid to give him a big run, that I think is a big concern here. But also, I think he's cheap enough regardless. If he's going to play 32 to 33 minutes, I think he's good enough anyway there. But what are your thoughts on those first few Clippers guys, and then I guess the rest of your breakdowns, team?
Yeah, so Reggie Jackson, like last night when looking at the slate, I already liked him at the price and the fact that he was one of two at the time players from this team you could project for 40 minutes. Now he's probably the only one. And with Paul George off the floor, obviously he's played a lot of minutes in that circumstance this season, but a 30.1% usage rate, 18% assist rate, over a fantasy point per minute. Marcus Morris, I think, would probably be my second favorite player. 25% usage rate, 0.93 fantasy points per minute in the split. But like we know that they've played Nicholas Batum plenty of center minutes. I think it's interesting because like you said, like you would think against a team that runs a lot of Joe Val and Jackson Hayes, Zubac's minutes should still be at worst kind of like right around where they were at last game. But like you said, we've seen his minutes kind of fluctuate all season long. So I still think we see some small ball lineups with Batum at the center, but he doesn't even have to get those center minutes now because there's 40 minutes available with Paul George being out. That could go to more to Batum, more to Covington, more to Terence Mann, who is interesting because his minutes weren't where we thought they'd be last game either. But we know Terence Mann, especially as a rebounder, near a 20% rebounding rate with Paul George off the floor. He's actually played the most minutes on the team with Paul George off the floor this season. You have Amir Coffey. Like, I think your point about the Clippers being the edge is interesting because even with Paul George out and even with no Kawhi Leonard, it could still be a situation where Reggie Jackson plays 40 and then Kennard, as long as he's active, Marcus Morris, Amir Coffey, Terence Mann, Batum, Robert Covington, they could all just handle a little bit of Paul George's minutes and it's not like two players all of a sudden get all the minutes. So I think it's really interesting. But Reggie Jackson's clearly the one. I'd probably put Marcus Morris too. What do you think of Terence Mann? Like, what do you think his minutes? What do you have projected for his minutes?
So Mann, I think, is a very important piece on this slate because I don't think he's going to get a lot of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
If I was giving him a range, it would probably be 28 to 32. And I think a lot of that depends on A, what they do with Norm Powell, how many minutes they give him, and B, what they do with some of these back end guys, Kennard, Covington, like how many minutes those guys get. So like Morris, I think he's going to be pretty good for like 30 to 33 minutes. Powell, like I mentioned, I have him for like 32 right now, but like if he's healthy and things are going well, like they probably run him a ton of minutes, and that would hurt Mann, it would hurt Covington, hurt Kennard. I think the interesting part for me is I left Coffee out of the rotation, and that was a little bit, I guess, sort of difficult, even though he played 10 seconds last game, which is very strange. But with Kennard coming back, I think that he probably just stays out of the rotation. And especially if Norm Powell finds himself getting big minutes. Now, if Powell was low owned, I think it would be super interesting. But since it's Terence Mann that's going to be super low owned, I think he is very interesting.
So do you like that as a pivot? Because again, it's like if this were a Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday night, the end of March, okay, Norman Powell, even with Paul George out, probably plays 22 to 25 minutes. But they lose this game, their season's over. And it's not like Paul George is like done for the playoffs. Like he has to get cleared, obviously, to come back. And then once he's cleared, he's good to go. And the Clippers, I'm not saying they're going to make a run, but like they win this game, they'll good chance they have Paul George back for the first round of the playoffs. So you have to kind of do whatever. And I know Ty Lue's done a lot with his rotation since joining this team, but like Norman Powell right now might be their best player with Reggie Jackson. Like, you got to play. Like, I think he's probably going to – I think he plays – what do you have projecting for?
I am for 32.
Yeah, I was going to say I think he plays at least 28. So,
yeah. So 28, I think for sure. I would be very surprised if he was under 28. He only played 26 last game. But, again, taking Paul George out of the equation, that's like that was their guy, their go-to guy. And
yeah, he came back for 3 games. And then the 4th game was their playing game, and he went up to 41 minutes immediately in that playing game. So
Yeah, and that's another thing too. Like they did not hesitate at all giving Paul George minutes when they needed him to, right? Coming off of the injury, and I get it. Every situation is different based on the player, but like Norman Powell is their best scorer in my opinion. Like I have Reggie Jackson projected to score more actual points because I am playing more minutes, but in
Hmm.
terms of like good scorers, like Norman Powell, I think is a pretty good scorer. And I think Reggie Jackson's a fine player, but I think Norman Powell would be the guy that they go to when they need points, right? And that alone could carry him to like 36 minutes, and that would obviously be a huge difference from the projection that I have now. But overall, like I think Norman Powell, even if he only plays 30 to 32 minutes, or maybe even if he goes down to the low end of 28, I still think he'll have a big usage rate, and I still think he'll be able to get there at this price. So I like Norman Powell, but Mann is the guy that I think is super interesting. I think I think Mann, Hunter, and Markkinen are like the first. Like, there's one guy from each team so far that I think is low owned, that I think is super appealing, and those are the three: Mann, Markkinen, and Hunter. Like, I don't think that they're ever going to go be the top scorer on the slate, but they could be one of the top point per dollar plays on the board. And Mann, I think the biggest thing is like when you think about Terence Mann, it's like we've seen him so many times go out and play like 38 minutes. They don't hesitate at all. They're completely fine with him in whatever scenario, whatever situation. So I think that is definitely in play here. I don't know if I read off his minutes, but I have him at 30 and a half right now. And I think his range is probably 28 to 32. But if Norm Powell is more limited than I think, Mann probably goes up. Or if they don't give Covington and Luke Kennard a ton of minutes, I have those two at 20 each. Mann probably plays more. I think the thing with Covington is when those games didn't matter at all at the end of the season, when they were sitting everybody, they were letting Covington play like 40 minutes when he scored 50 points, whatever it
Yeah.
was. They, that tells me that they probably don't care a whole lot, or they don't like rely on him a whole lot. But again, he's also a good defender, and that can earn you some playing time here. So again, I think the big thing is I have Amir Coffey out of the rotation. That could be wrong. So in terms of things that I think could be wrong, Amir Coffey out of the rotation could be wrong. I wouldn't be all that surprised to see him get some minutes. I don't think he plays a ton to be relevant in DFS. The Kennard and Covington minutes could be wrong. I have them both at 20. The Mann minutes could be wrong, but I don't think that they would be like incredibly wrong. And if anything, I think if they're wrong, I could be on the low end. And then Norm Powell, the minutes could be wrong on him, where I've met about 32 minutes. And that could go either way, in my opinion.
Who do you think closes this game for them? Reggie Jackson. I think Marcus Morris probably closes. And then it could be Zubac, obviously, but it could be I think they could legitimately close with Jackson, Morris, and then it could be. I wouldn't be shocked if it was Terence Mann. Like we've seen them when he's playing well, close with him and play massive minutes. I think it could easily be. Obviously, probably should be Norman Powell. So maybe you put him in as a third, and then it could be like I said, Covington, Batum, Zubac. Who knows? If Zubac is not playing well and Hartenstein is, maybe Hartenstein closes against Joe Val.
Yeah.
Like I think this team is like it's so tough to project them for minutes, and I think that makes it so interesting on the slate, especially with I love the Terrence Mann call because I think he's a player, like I mentioned, he gets rebounds when he's on the floor. And especially on a team that if they go small at all and they play small ball at any points in this game, you're going to have Terrence Mann playing alongside a Robert Covington lineup at center or a Batum lineup at center. And there's just even more rebounding opportunities there for Terrence Mann, who's already at a near 20% rebounding rate with Paul George off the floor.
Yeah. I think you made a good point about this being such an interesting spot because of the ownership on some of these guys, right? Like a lot of them, there's a lot of question marks in this rotation, in my opinion, outside of Reggie Jackson and Marcus Morris. I think he's pretty safe as well, but that's not really reflected in the ownership. Like we're still seeing Zubac projected fairly high. Powell's, I think, like the second highest owned player on the entire slate, which is crazy. But again, like I mentioned, even if he only plays 28 to 30 minutes, I still think he can get there at this price because he is so cheap, and I still think he has a good ceiling. But yeah, man, overall, like with ownership considered, definitely my favorite play from the Clippers, just because I think that if we saw him play 35 minutes, 36 minutes, I wouldn't be surprised at all, especially with the things that he can bring to the table defensively. I also think that Batum is a good fade. Like I would much rather play Terrence Mann over Batum here. Um, I get that we've seen Batum play some time at the center, and even I believe late in the game, Hartenstein didn't play at all in the second half. So
Mm-hmm.
Batum played some good center minutes in the second half last game, but I don't think that's all that likely here. Last game, Karl Anthony Towns was in foul trouble a lot. I know he still played a lot in the third quarter, but I still think that it's going to be a lot of Zubac or Hartenstein splitting a majority of the center minutes. I have them combining for about 41 of the center minutes. That leaves Batum at about 7.
And Eddie jumped on stream with Zach and I when we were previewing that game, and Eddie's obviously knows everything about basketball. He made a point about how this team has been defending Karl Anthony Towns. They've been putting Batum at center and just meeting him at the 3-point line, and that's why Batum had been playing a lot of center minutes in that spot, and why Towns has kind of struggled. So in this spot, you obviously don't worry about Joval as a 3-point shooter as much as if at all, but especially not as much as Towns. So maybe there's a spot where they can, they play less Batum at the 5, and all of a sudden his minutes aren't exactly as high as we thought they'd be, even with Paul George out.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, do you have the same thoughts, Mann over Batum?
I wasn't on that originally, but yeah, I think because I've seen this team Terence Mann provide, rebounding, defense, hustle, all this great stuff in huge games, playoff games, and they just roll with him. So it would not shock me at all if they do it again.
Yeah, it's even when I was doing and maybe I had a little bit of bias in the minutes there because of that. That thought around Mann is very real. That's definitely how I feel about that there. And the ownership, he'll probably be half the ownership that Batum is. Now there's one other scenario that I want to touch on, and it's the Covington and Kennard group here. Both pretty expensive on DraftKings. I don't know if you're interested in either of them. Maybe small interest in Covington. He's only 4,500, but again, Batum, Mann, you have Morris there for 500 more than Covington. Not really interested, but Luke Kennard on FanDuel, 3,800. He's 5,200 on DraftKings. I don't even think about considering it there, but 3,800 on FanDuel. Would you be all that surprised if Kennard plays, 25 minutes and has a 23% usage rate and he shoots a ton with that second unit?
I wouldn't be surprised at all. Yeah. like DraftKings, it's hard to get there obviously at 5,200 when not only do you have some of the players from the same team, but the Hawks players we talked about, they are all cheaper, right? Everybody's cheaper except for Bogdanovich. Powell's only $100 more expensive, who minutes concerns to an extent put aside, I don't think Luke Kennard is playing more than Norman Powell. If he does, it's by a minute maybe, if he just gets hot from 3. But even then, Norman Powell is going to have the ball in his hands a lot more. So, yeah, FanDuel, that's fine. DraftKings, it's obviously very tough to get there.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess I didn't mention this, but Cody just brought this up in chat, and Kennard is still questionable.
Yeah, I was going to ask you because you said he was back. I thought he was still questionable, but
yeah.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that news and just making sure Jared Allen still plays from Cleveland. Did we get any other news? Bogdanovich, Jared Allen confirmed, starting 5s, anything? I know Lock's at 7:30, so.
Yeah. So probably have a little bit of time until we get that stuff. But yeah, if Kennard's out, that definitely makes Mann safer in terms of his minutes. Probably helps.
You probably hope Kennard is in because you're really interested in Terence Mann at less popularity for sure. So
yeah, definitely. And I think it would make me feel better about Mann, but I don't think it changes his ceiling. I think if Kennard, I have Kennard at 20 minutes, and that could very easily be high. Especially same thing with Covington. Could easily be high there. But let's talk the other side of this game here in New Orleans.
There's another team from this game.
Yeah, exactly. Feels like we just talked an eternity about that one. But this is the one where I don't know if there's a low-owned guy that I think is super interesting. There's one name that I have that I think is low-owned and I think has a ceiling, and he's the kind of guy that I like on these 2-game slates. But let's talk these first 4 guys, right? In terms of these guys might have the safest minutes on the slate, outside of maybe the Hawks wings, but the Hawks wings probably aren't going to play 40 minutes. McCollum played 39 or 40 last game, I believe it was. I think it was 40. Ingram only played 29, but he got into some mega foul trouble. The guy could not stop fouling. There was one foul on Pirtle underneath the basket, and it was just the dumbest foul I've ever seen. He reached around and like grabbed his waistband. I was like, Ingram, what are you doing? Like, if you're gonna follow him, at least make it count, and then don't do that weird foul. Like, it was just senseless. I don't know what he's doing. So if he stays out of foul trouble in a do or die game, I think he'll play 40 minutes. So I have Ingram at 40. I have McCollum at 40. I have Herb Jones at 38. That guy, Yeah, looked really good. It looked like he was built for the playoffs too. Great
He was
defender.
he had the assignment for DeJounte Murray, which when I originally wrote last night previewing this game, I was like, okay, if he just had that assignment on DeJounte Murray, guaranteed he has the same assignment for Paul George.
Yeah,
Now, like Herb Jones isn't like I think Herb Jones is already like a top 20 defensive, like he's really good. So I wonder if they just say, okay, Reggie Jackson's next man up, go guard him. Either way, I think Herb Jones, like you said, locked into 35 at least minutes. But I think there was upside for 40 if Paul George played. There still could be. But yeah, he had a really nice all around game.
yeah, and a couple nice offensive plays too. He had a couple big dunks as well. He definitely stepped up with Ingram dealing with the foul trouble. But I think a big thing is you mentioned him potentially defending Reggie Jackson. I think he could also be kind of assigned to Norm Powell.
Sure, that
Um,
was yeah. It was he's guarding one of those two pretty
yeah,
easily.
yeah. I think it depends on kind of who they're okay with sticking McCollum on. And if it were me, I would say let's allow McCollum to defend Reggie Jackson. But again, like it's probably going to be a little bit of both. So I don't think it really matters all that much. And again, both of those guys are so cheap to where you just need the volume, right? Like DeJounte Murray, if he was this price, he would have gotten there easily. And those guys probably aren't going to do the same things that Murray does like throughout the stat sheet, but in terms of shot volume, they'll probably be pretty similar, maybe even a little bit more, right? Because Murray kind of stopped shooting there at the end of the game because he just couldn't make anything. And Keldon Johnson said, I'll just start chucking everything and I'll shoot under 30% from the field as well. Man, those guys could not
I'm
find.
just happy for Zach. He didn't have to sweat at all in that game.
Yeah.
Got
I
his loss. It was pretty much established from the jump, and he didn't want to be there. But like the Spurs were part of the reason why. Obviously, there was more reasons, but part of the reason why the Lakers didn't get in. So like you didn't get you were part of the reason why LA didn't get in the play in. Sure, you could have had some higher draft selections, but you didn't. They didn't get in the playoffs, so Zach can't be too upset.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping Zach would see my tweet. I said DeJounte Murray waited until the play-in game to realize that the Spurs were tanking. Uh, and Keldon Johnson, I didn't even like. Didn't even see his field goal percentage. So I should have added him in that tweet too. That was a
Well, he
oversight by
kept hitting
me.
like game winners down the stretch against like Portland and Golden State and these teams to get him into the play-in.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So I guess he earned a little bit of a longer leash there, but yeah. So Joe Bell, I think, is the interesting thing. He played 36 minutes last game. Another guy who early on in the season we saw him play a ton of minutes with Ingram out. Last game, Ingram in foul trouble. He played 36 minutes. So the big question for this team is, did Joe Val get that extended run? I would say probably 3-4 extra minutes based on Ingram being in foul trouble or based on the playoff atmosphere. I tend to think it was based on the playoff atmosphere and the playoff environment, needing to win and all that good stuff. But I guess I wouldn't hate you if you like thought differently because again they haven't really loved to run him out there for a ton of minutes, but regardless I still think like the 29-28 minute scenarios are out the window now for Joe Val. I don't think he's ever going to do that here unless he gets into foul trouble. I think 30 to 32 is like completely 100% safe. I think 35 36 is more likely, and at that rate same deal as Capella, right? Very good permanent guy in the minutes.
probably even better than
Oh yeah,
Capella. I mean, we
yeah,
remember when he was with Toronto, we were just hoping he got to
yeah,
25 minutes. Like if he got to
yeah.
25 minutes, he was going for 40 fantasy points.
Yeah, but now, yeah, he is a better permanent guy. But now that minute is the minutes deal is kind of completely
And like,
established,
how
right?
much do you worry about LA still going small at times with Paul George out? I think it's probably less likely, but I still don't think because like you have like it's they've been running a lot of Jackson Hayes, obviously, and Joe Val. So it's like not even the fact that they have one traditional center, but they have a lot of size in their front court. And then like Larry Nance is back. Not that he's like a huge player, but like 15 minutes from Larry Nance. Like I think it's going to be a lot tougher for them to go small in this game, especially with Paul George out.
Yep, I agree. And I think regardless, I think that they would want to get Joe Val
Hmm.
the minutes, even if it was just okay. You have Batum out there, we'll just go bully him. I think that's how they would approach it. But again, like hard to know for 100% certainty. But what are your thoughts on these top end guys here?
Yeah, McCollum has been my favorite. He's just been really consistent since joining this team. Usage rate, assist rate have all been really strong. I think once again you kind of project him for the most minutes. Paul George being out obviously impacts this entire defense, this entire team. So McCollum would be my favorite. I think among the centers, right? Like, there's really a lot of question marks, like with obviously Jared Allen and then both the Clippers centers. So like Joval at 8K, like if he plays 32 minutes at 8K, he could still go for 50. We've seen it. Um, and then like Herb Jones, I think is still interesting, right? 4,800, like he's going to play more minutes than Kevin Herter, than DeAndre Hunter, than Bogdanovich. So while he doesn't have the same ceiling because he doesn't shoot as much, doesn't do much offensively as them, he could still walk into another 30 fantasy point game. I think he's averaging like 25 points per game against this team over the course of the regular season. So I'd still be fine going to Herb Jones. I mean, you talked about you kind of led with this, like someone from this team that's going to go under the radar. I mean, we saw obviously the minutes are a little bit tougher to kind of rely on because of the foul trouble from Ingram. But who's that player you were talking about? I'm kind of interested. I think I might know who it is.
It's Jackson Hayes. Like he's
Okay.
the guy that stands out the most, and I guess there's one other name, Jose Alvarado.
Yeah, those are, I was assuming it was one of the two.
Yeah, but like Alvarado's price on DraftKings isn't all that appeling.
It really isn't. He's like 4.3.
Yeah, but like that's also why he'll be like sub 2%, right? But like Steph made this point in his one of his FTN bets in the bet tracker, and it's like Alvarado's kind of overtaken Devontae Graham pretty clearly, right?
And he's due for one of those steals per game where he just sneaks on the sideline. I think he actually didn't get it last game. He tried, but
he tried.
He like Devontae Graham is like, it's Jose Alvarado is the backup guard on this team now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's probably defensive stuff. Like I think he's actually been getting a little bit lucky based on like his actual point production, but maybe a little bit unlucky based on some of those ancillary stats. But Jackson Hayes is more so just like one of those guys that if he does get like 24 minutes, we've seen it plenty of times over his career, but and maybe even less than you might expect here this season with him at times getting consistent starts. But he's a guy we've seen at times post like 1.2 fantasy point per minute showings. So those two guys I think are somewhat interesting. I like the guys that we talked about earlier on the three other teams a little bit more, but yeah, they're definitely worth mentioning.
Like Markkinen,
Mann, and DeAndre Hunter.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I agree.
And Mann's the only guy that's like really that close in pricing to these guys, with him being 200 cheaper. But so I guess in terms of prioritizing someone like McCollum or Ingram, are you doing that at all, or even Joval? Any priorities here? Or I mean, obviously you're going to have interest in them because it's a 2-game slate, but like for example,
I'd still be getting to Garland, Trey Young over them, but McCollum
so what about
would be my
Joval
favorite.
versus like Capella and Jared Allen? How do you rank those guys? And even Zubac, I guess.
If we somehow got word that Jared Allen was playing, starting, and not limited, even then though, like it's so tough because like even if we get word he won't be limited, one bad bounce and it starts hurting him again, he could be done. So I would probably go. That's really tough between Capella and Joval because Capella seems really safe now. When like 2 months ago he was playing like 26 minutes, he wasn't closing games. Remember that?
Yeah.
But I still, I'll go Capella over Joval. It's really close, though.
Yeah, I think it is super close.
Jared Allen being back, like if Jared Allen somehow didn't play, I might lean Joval.
Yeah,
but I think either way, like Capella's minutes seem kind of solidified, but Jared Allen playing gives him a better chance of getting over 30, which would be awesome for Capella.
Yeah, I prefer Joval slightly, but if you need the salary, I think that Capella is the guy that I look to right after that. Maybe Evan Mobley on DraftKings where he's 6,800, but I like Capella a little bit more than Mobley, I think, today. And again, like I mentioned, like I could be low on Capella. I'm at 32, 33 minutes, and I wouldn't be that surprised if he played 34, 35. We know that he can make use of those a couple extra minutes. And additionally, I think Capella will be much lower owned than Joval, 15% for sure, I think. But I would rank them Joval, Capella, 1-2 for me at center position. And then let's rank these guards here real quick. McCollum, Garland, Trey Young. I guess we'll rank those three. How do you feel about those guys?
I would go Garland, Trey, McCollum.
Okay. I would rank them the same way.
I just think Garland's like $1,000 too cheap.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you can make the same case for Trey Young too.
Easily, very easily.
I think DraftKings does this with all their sports when the slates get smaller. That's when they start to lower the prices so people can fit guys in a little bit more easier. But So Trey Young, Garland, I would also rank 1. Trey Young, very close second, though. And McCollum is not like
Yeah.
a far-fetched 3 either. But McCollum, I think, is interesting because he'll be low owned, in my opinion, compared to Ingram. I think people will play
Well,
Ingram over
especially
McCollum.
because
And then
especially
those top
because not
two.
only do you have Garland and Trey Young, but then you have Reggie Jackson, who's going to be like
Yep.
70%, 65%.
Yeah. So if you were, sitting down and you wanted to make a contrarian lineup, I think 2 names to start with would be McCollum and Capella, because they're not in the natural sense going to be super low owned,
Hmm.
but they're going to be pivots, right? Trey Young, Garland will almost certainly be more popular. Ingram will definitely be more popular than McCollum, who's in the same game. And if McCollum's having a good game, it's possible Ingram has to take the back seat there. Not guaranteed, because we saw Ingram score 27 points in 29 minutes last game. But and then for Capella, I think he'll be a pivot off of Joval. Maybe not as extreme as the McCollum off of Ingram pivot, but he'll definitely be lower owned in my opinion. So those 2 guys, starting with those 2 guys, could be a good way to get contrarian.
Yeah, I like it.
All right. Let's see. We have some questions here. Shazam asked Joval, Zubac, and Gallo versus CJ, Mann, and Marcus Morris. Do you have any preference there?
I prefer the second side.
I do as well. And I think it'll be lower owned, which I think is just more the merrier, right? All right. Let's see. Top value, guys.
Like, I would like to see a starting 5, but the minutes could easily flip. But he's not the top value, first of all. But I think Rondo's still in play as a value. But top value is, for me, I mean, you obviously have to look at the Clippers, Terence Mann, Reggie Jackson is, like, on FanDuel is under 6K. You mentioned, even Luke Kennard over on FanDuel is cheap. I think you can take a shot on Jose Alvarado at 4,300. And then, like you mentioned, Terence Mann, Batum, if you want to go there as well.
Yep. I would rank them. So Reggie Jackson, I think, is the best value play on the slate. I don't think he's he's 6'1", so he's maybe not a value, but
Right,
he's
yeah,
the best point per dollar play, in
yeah.
my opinion. I also think Powell, I mean, even Zubac is down there, right? I just think he's a little bit more volatile and he's going to be chalky. So I think like Zubac being
Marcus Morris on FanDuel is really cheap too.
yeah. And then Gallinari and Terrence Mann also projecting as some of the better values on the board. Morris is there as well, Herb Jones. But also you have Brandon Ingram right there. And Ingram has the 4th best point per dollar number for me on DraftKings today, 7,800, super cheap. And like I mentioned, I have him at 40 minutes. I know he only played 29 last game, but foul trouble definitely held him back there. Again, do or die. I think he plays a ton of minutes. All right, let's see here. All right, so we kind of talked about the value guys. We talked about the spend up guys. Let's talk about some mid range guys. Let's say from 6K to like 8K. Who would be some of your favorite mid tier plays on DraftKings in that price range?
Norman Powell, DeAndre Hunter, Marcus Morris would probably be the top 3
Okay.
for me. But I'm starting to like your call on marketing and tournaments because I don't know if we see him, especially in the playoffs with Kevin Love needing to play minutes. I don't know if we see him play like 36, 37 like he had been playing not too long ago, but he could still play 30 to 32. But I would still prefer the 3 players I mentioned over him in that 6K and under: Norman Powell, DeAndre Hunter, Marcus Morris.
Yep, I like that. I also kind of like even the kind of a step above. Like I think Mobley and LeVert are pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, even with Jared Allen back, Mobley is too cheap. Like,
Yeah.
we've seen all regular season when Jared Allen and Mobley have been healthy, they've been like Allen at 7.8, Mobley at like 7.3. And the usage rate's still around 19%. Not that he's ever a high usage player, but it's still around 19% with Allen on the floor, and the rebounding rate's like 23%. He's blocked 2 shots at least in every game since coming back. I just think, and you look at it like, you don't project blocks really, but like Trey Young is top 7 in drives per game, so he's going to attack the basket a lot. That's going to lead to shot block opportunities. Clint Capella is 4th in the NBA in paint touches per game. Literally all of his baskets come at the rim. And for whatever reason, if Allen is limited, Mobley's going to play the 5 against Clint Capella for a ton of minutes, and he's going to be always around the rim. So,
yeah, I like that a lot. All right.
Also, he's just awesome at basketball. So,
yeah. Anything that you find sticking out to you as like an edge that you want to touch on real quick?
I think what could be an edge. You mentioned Terence Mann. I think it's a good call. I think it could easily be one of Markkinen or Kevin Love as well. Like Kevin Love, especially. Like if he plays 28 minutes, we've seen him. We've seen him on stretches. I mean, it's not going to happen. But we saw the stretch where he scored 40 or 55 fantasy points in 15 minutes. He's not going to do that. But like, he's still a very good 3-point shooter, a great rebounder, and his advanced metrics, his rates and everything when he's on the floor are good. So. It's obviously more, a lot more volatile now because Jarrett Allen is going to play center. Mobley's going to play the 4 and the 5, and they have other ways to go. But you also need Kevin Love on the floor. Like, this can't be a game for Cleveland where Kevin Love plays his 16 minutes. I just don't think they can have that happen. And, like, Kevin Love defensively, like, if he's on Gallinari or if he's on Kevin Huerter or DeAndre Hunter, like, I don't think they're that worried about Kevin Love defensively for those assignments as they would have been against, like, Kevin Durant and, whoever.
Yeah, for sure. And those guys are really good permanent guys too, so you can easily see that getting done there. I think that for me, it's looking at those slight pivots, based on the team, right? Like I mentioned, McCollum, like he's not quite projecting as as good of a play as some of these guys, but he's going to be a really strong pivot play. Same with Capella off of like Joe Val. So that's kind of how I would take it, team by team and game by game in terms of looking for those slight pivots. And then obviously Terence Mann is someone that I like quite a bit here. But all right, anything else that you want to cover here before we get out of here?
Go Cavs, and make sure you check out all the baseball content. You guys have been doing an awesome job. After tonight, Kyle, just enjoy the weekend if you can. Take some time, maybe watch a movie and kind of relax for 2 hours if you can. But no, check baseball content if you are, if you're just getting into baseball, like Kyle, Vlad, everybody, David Jones, Javi, they've been crushing it just like they did for basketball. So it's gonna be a long season, probably longer season, obviously, but baseball is a tough sport. So make sure you check out all the content tools, everything at FTN Fantasy, FTN Daily.
Yeah, appreciate the shout out. Yeah, we have a great team over there, grinding every single day. So it's been fun so far. Sounds like Eddie is going live after us, so stay tuned for that.
Awesome.
Eddie's going to break you guys down up until lock, so make sure you are sticking with him, and you'll see the little Eddie Fear Pokemon intro. I'm assuming we'll see that. Maybe we won't. Maybe I got you guys' hopes up. But either way, we'll see you guys next time. As always,
let's get these beans.